Hello, my name is Ryan Beam, and I'm a student at the University of Kentucky studying economics and data science. In this series, I explore how data and AI are applied in real-world settings and how the field is continuing to evolve. Today, I'm joined by Benjamin Kinsella, a lecturer at Columbia University and a researcher and practitioner working in the intersection of AI safety, governance, and operations. Ben, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Just to kind of get us started off, you've taken a pretty interdisciplinary path across linguistics, economics, operations, and now AI safety and governance. How did your career evolve in that direction, and what really shaped your choices along the way?
For sure. I think if you were to look at some of these almost like a line item, you would definitely say nonlinear. But when you trace things back from the very beginning, for me, it's always been about impact and also human connection. So when I was at UK, I was really interested in economics, decision making. I really loved language. So Spanish took me to live abroad. And these are the types of exposure that then led me to think about what is a world in social science research? How can I build upon my academic career at UK and go into a field like linguistics because of my interest in language, but not just language, like theoretical language. It was really interested in social linguistics. So how do we use language or policy? So obviously different communities speak different languages. How do we inform education policy or health policy? This was this really interesting intersection of obviously what I was studying, but then also communities. And so those communities, in this case, outside of New York, so the greater New York metropolitan area. And I always envisioned a life that was both practitioners, so maybe working in nonprofits or government, maybe even industry, and also tied to academia. But I never actually anticipated going into my next phase of career, which was in data science. And the reason I went down that route because there was a real opportunity as nonprofits were becoming more data first and the amount of decisions that could be made using machine learning and AI, which very much intersected with, social science research. So how do we use data to make decisions, for example, statistics and data science methodologies? And so I then transitioned into data science, a data science nonprofit working closely with the Rockefeller Foundation, data.org. So running some of these large scale challenges of enabling nonprofits to be able to implement data science and machine learning applications. So this was a really interesting moment where you're thinking about social entrepreneurship, building products that ended up just naturally leading me to my next role in startup. So I worked in early stage startups, and startups obviously are much more commercially driven. And you're thinking about how do you build a company from the ground up, right? So all these things that I've learned from data and AI that were being mapped onto industry applications, but taking on a role because of my ability to manage programs, operations, projects that allowed me to run actually operations at these companies. So I was the head of operations and product at one startup that I was building. And it was through these experiences that at a time when AI was being developed and big AI labs like OpenAI needed folks on the training side. So if you're working with researchers, you're working on safety initiatives, you need someone with an interdisciplinary background. I just happened to be in a really unique position to that leading me to OpenAI to work at an AI lab. And my work at OpenAI was on the human data team. So human data is the team under the research org that's responsible for the expert inputs that go into both post training. So, how do you make models better, smarter, faster, or even safer, right? So, before you deploy a model, you need to make sure that it's safe. Are there any biorisk hazards? Are there any, can someone use it to create, um, a dangerous program? And the only way to do that is to work with experts. And so, for the human data team, and my role, it was coordinating with, thousands of experts to ensure that, models were safe before we released them. I learned a lot, obviously, through the kind of arc of my career. And then that led me to where I'm at now, which is AI safety. As AI models get more and more capable, people are using models. You need people to start thinking about not just the technical components, right? So, like, are they reward hacking? Can people use them in dangerous ways? But even people who are able to coordinate stakeholders, so governments, foundations, multilateral institutions. So that's the kind of crux of my career, where I'm thinking about how do we just work with really smart humans and continue to learn, knowing that these technologies are being used around the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And going off that that part about AI safety, because I know that's a big part of where you're at now. What does that look like day to day? Because from the outside, and I know you touched on a little bit about that. From the outside, it seems very experimental. It's hard to truly understand what that looks like. So on the day to day, what does that look like in an applied setting?
Yeah, so AI safety can mean a lot of different things. It's I'll say new field where there's a lot of attention being put on AI, so a lot more attention on how can we make AI, quote safe. But it means different things for different people. And so we could be interested in the the technical aspects. So let's say folks who are working on safety initiatives like reward hacking, so like our models actually like incentivized to do bad things without you realizing that they're doing bad things. Maybe they're working on red teaming. So, like, how do we understand if the model has the capacity to do bad things? Maybe you have people who are building evaluations. And so, evaluations are think of them like standardized benchmarks, like giving a human the SAT, but you would give a model these different benchmarks depending on what you want to measure, because you want to measure their ability to perform certain type of task. And so, maybe you want to know, is the model going to give you dangerous responses, relevant to medicine, or maybe they're able to, um, get you to create some biorisk hazard. So there's a lot of efforts that are put into the technical piece. So how do we like technically evaluate or interpret the model? But there's also the policy regulation approach. So how do we translate? We know models can do this, so how do we translate that into a policy or law? Like, maybe we shouldn't be allowing chatbot or like products to build mental health applications for people under 18, right? So like we know that they can be dangerous, and so that there have to be some type of regulatory thing in place. And there's also things around governance. So governance is kind of a large term, but we want to coordinate initiatives across different stakeholders. Maybe it's about restricting chip distribution, around the world, or maybe we want to think about the impact of data centers or other types of AI training on environmental aspects. And so it's a really large field that pulls from other disciplines. You got responsible AI, ethical AI, you name it. And so it's a moment when we need a lot of diverse stakeholders in the room to be able to ensure that these things are safe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm sure, as you said, you're aware of many hats. And I think that that really applies well to, AI safety. So that's super interesting. Kind of shifting gears a little bit to that you're actually also a lecturer at Columbia. And within these classes, and when you're teaching, applied AI or research design or safety or any of these different things, what do you think most students and early practitioners most misunderstand about AI today?
There could be a lot of things, right? And we're continuing to learn about this technology. One thing that I'm seeing or have seen is we overestimate how, smart a model is. And we use these chatbots quite often, and most often, or many times, they're giving us good responses. They're useful for whatever the task was. But on the other hand, if you're not mindful, they can hallucinate. They can give you, wrong facts. They can do things that like you didn't even ask them to do. And so I think people mistake the intelligence part with just the illusion of looking smart.
Mhm.
And for students and also practitioners and people in the workplace, they have to understand that a few things. The first is, the LLM is simply like predicting the next word. So it's not this oracle, it's not providing you, the source of knowledge for everything. They've advanced quite a bit. On the other hand, they do have things like sycophancy, so they like almost like make you believe that you're the best. They have things like hallucinations, so you don't even realize that they're giving you the wrong. You wouldn't know unless you're a domain expert in it. So students who are just using that for papers. There's also interesting like human level things like psychology things. So what does over-reliance look like? So if I use ChatGPT, everything from you know, wanting to date someone and I'm, like I have to like turn to ChatGPT or whatever chatbot to, do I say this or do I say that? Right. So like I'm constantly using these technology to outsource decisions. And so what does that mean when we lose agency or we lose our autonomy in that? Or things like writing, class assignments. There are certain um, steps that are involved when you learn something. And those steps typically include friction. So when you remove that friction, for example, copying and pasting an essay from chatbot into an assignment, you've removed that friction and you haven't synthesized with the material in ways that you would have if you didn't. So there's, things where students and other folks are starting to pay attention to, like when is the best time to use this technology? When should I not use this technology? What do I gain from using it? So maybe I gain a few minutes back where I don't have to think. I can just, I don't have to write the SQL query. I
Mhm.
can just have the chatbot write it. But you do lose things, right? So maybe you lose the agency in being able to write that. Maybe you lose the friction to be able to do that. Maybe you lose the like, oh, I feel so good. I just wrote that. And so there are some human level factors as well, not just the technical pieces. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And going off, you mentioned friction a few times. Speaking on that you've been on the inside of OpenAI during a period of rapid scaling, one of the biggest names in tech and companies in the US and in the world right now. How did governance conversations actually happen there? Was it friction, collaboration, or something else?
Yeah, I'll address this as like decision making, and obviously from the outside you see the shiny outputs that come out. So like the new benchmarks that are released, the new models that are deployed, the blog post. On the inside, there's a lot of work that goes into that, and sometimes you have to change, paths. So maybe you're working on one thing, you're doing a lot of experiments, and you realize that maybe you should shift focus to something else. So, you mentioned about things that are fast-paced, a lot of growth. On the inside, it requires, agility. So being able to change very quickly. Maybe you're working on something and realize that it didn't give you the result that you were expecting, and so you have to quickly change and, move to something else. It was a lot of work, and the biggest thing is working with teammates who are positive, who are that really want to do best for this technology, and making this technology ethical. That requires diverse viewpoints. And so from the human data perspective, you're working with people around the world. You want diverse voices that are part of those data sets. And all that matters when you're thinking of post training, so making your model, really strong. Safety, when you want to think about those edge cases or unknown unknowns, and it really requires a lot of different inputs, and really all hands on deck to work on things in a collaborative, ethical way.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. And I appreciate that perspective on things. And kind of going off of that and you've been around a lot of different perspectives and you said, working and collaborating with these people who are positive and trying to do the best for this technology. And you've also been, you do a lot with AI. So
Mm.
what's something you've changed your mind about because some of these perspectives in the last few years when it comes to AI?
Um, I think it's similar to what I'd mentioned before about what over-reliance looks like. And maybe to add a little bit more color to that, think about social media and the lessons we learned from social media, maybe the lessons we didn't learn from social media. Um, you can sit down on your phone and you can just like lose an hour or more scrolling and scrolling. Um, it's like these things have been designed in ways that can capture your attention. And in many ways, there are the positive effects, like, okay, I feel closer to friends, or I feel access, direct access to people I know. I can see what, my friends are doing. But in other ways, there are those human components, like, oh, it actually makes me feel lonelier, right? I'm like in my apartment by myself. I'm not actually with friends, like two friends, right? But like, I see everything everyone's doing, but in many ways, it makes me feel worse off. So taking those lessons and applying to those to AI, I think a lot about over-reliance. So students of mine start resisting, right? I've seen some resistance, like I can use this for all of my assignments. It makes my life easy. But on the other hand, I remove that friction, I remove that effort, the pain, right, involved in learning, sitting down and writing a SQL query or sitting down and writing an essay, synthesizing through a lot of different resources. So it's a critical inquiry into what we are losing by doing that and what we're gaining. And then an extension of that is like, how can I integrate or incorporate these tools to maximize my flourishing, not like diminish? And if that means um, sort of like a hard rule on using ChatGPT for like certain types of tasks, or a hard rule on like everything you do has to be, you do first and then maybe the chatbot can be used afterwards. The thing I'll say is that no one really has the answer, right? So these are things that people are talking about now, and we probably will continue to discover the effect on them, whether the positive effects or negative effects. All that's to say is we're living in a really interesting world where we want to, kind of think about the process and frameworks that make us better off, not worse off. Yeah.
Right. And kind of in moving on off of that to the things that are, that keeps getting better off. As we wrap up, you spend a lot of time thinking about the risks and the failures and the negative effects of AI, maybe over-reliance and the things that, like you said, we're still going to be finding out for years to come. What gives you optimism about the future for AI and how we're learning to govern it?
Yeah, I think you're starting to get the right people in the room, and knowing that to create sort of a governance structure, um, or regulations is going to require different inputs, right? It's not just like one side who says like let's stop this immediately, or another side that says no, we need to go as fast as possible. It needs to take a balanced approach, and that balanced approach requires many different inputs. And I think we're at a point now where you're starting to get a lot more of that, those inputs. Another is, and this is why trust is so important, because a person who doesn't know much about AI may hear words like gradient descent or like backpropagation or things like model weights. And you're like, those terms sound scary, right? Like I don't know what those means. And so it's really important to think about how you're communicating these things to
Mhm.
folks.
Yeah.
And if you're making the framing extremely exclusive, right? Like this is, for you to engage in this requires this knowledge. And so, in part of having diverse voices, in part of those discussions, it also requires trust. And, if you have people who like trust the technology too much, then bad things could happen. On the other hand, if people who are like, I don't want anything to do with this at all, bad things could happen because you need sort of the continuing deployment. So there's like a very iterative process to understand this work is not just a like one decision and we've solved it, but it's going to require, I mean, I think this is just the path forward, right? Like it's going to require constant iteration and constant evaluation and oversight to ensure that the models are safe. So that's the one thing that gives me optimism, where people are starting to become very interested in this. And then also it's like that, peace inside of ourselves where like we want to feel good when we learn something. Like we want to feel good when we connect with someone. And so you have people now, like in the past, who acknowledge that and see that, and then they're almost carrying that message with them. And so if it's just setting good examples for your students or setting good examples for your employees, we don't have when we have very few answers, right? Like we are like wanting to make sure that anything that we're building is safe, and then also we're thinking critically about the sort of ecosystem at large. So yeah, that's some things that make me optimistic. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it's good to hear, it's good to hear those things from somebody who's doesn't have, I'm not in the industry currently. I'm not out there in the real world experiencing these things. So it's good to hear your perspective when you're so close to these developing topics and issues. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing your perspective and meeting with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. It was a fun conversation.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.